Chapter 8 of Book 5 of Les Misérables, Volume 5, by Victor Hugo. Les Misérables, Volume 5, by Victor Hugo, translated by Isabel Florence Hapgood. Book 5. Chapter 8. Two Men Impossible to Find. Marius's enchantment, great as it was, could not efface from his mind other preoccupations. While the wedding was in preparation, and while awaiting the date fixed upon, he caused difficult and scrupulous retrospective researches to be made. He owed gratitude in various quarters. He owed it on his father's account. He owed it on his own. There was Thénardier. There was the unknown man who had brought him, Marius, back to Monsieur Gillenormand. Marius endeavored to find these two men, not intending to marry, to be happy, and to forget them, and fearing that, were their debts of gratitude not discharged, they would leave a shadow in his life which promised so brightly for the future. It was impossible for him to leave all these arrears of suffering behind him, and he wished, before entering joyously into the future, to obtain acquittance from the past. That Thénardier was a villain detracted nothing from the fact that he had saved Colonel Pontmercy. Thénardier was a ruffian in the eyes of all the world except Marius. And Marius, ignorant of the real scene in the battlefield of Waterloo, was not aware of the peculiar detail that his father, so far as Thénardier was concerned, was in the strange position of being indebted to the latter for his life without being indebted to him for any gratitude. None of the various agents whom Marius employed succeeded in discovering any trace of Thénardier. Obliteration appeared to be complete in that quarter. Madame Thénardier had died in prison pending the trial. Thénardier and his daughter Azelma, the only two remaining of that lamentable group, had plunged back into the gloom. The gulf of the social unknown had silently closed above those beings. On the surface there was not visible so much as that quiver, that trembling, those obscure concentric circles which announce that something has fallen in, and that the plummet may be dropped. Madame Thénardier being dead, Boulatruelle being eliminated from the case, Clos Quesos having disappeared, the principal persons accused having escaped from prison, the trial connected with the ambush in the Gorbeau house had come to nothing. That affair had remained rather obscure. The bench of Assizes had been obliged to content themselves with two subordinates, Panchaud, alias Printenaire, alias Bourgonneil, and Demillard, alias Dumillars, who had been inconsistently condemned, after a hearing of both sides of the case, to 10 years in the galleys. Hard labor for life had been the sentence pronounced against the escaped and contumacious accomplices. Thénardier, the head and leader, had been, through contumacy, likewise condemned to death. This sentence was the only information remaining about Thénardier, casting upon that buried name its sinister light like a candle beside a bier. Moreover, by thrusting Thénardier back into the very remotest depths, through a fear of being recaptured, this sentence added to the density of the shadows which enveloped this man. As for the other person, as for the unknown man who had saved Marius, the researches were at first to some extent successful, and then came to an abrupt conclusion. They succeeded in finding the carriage which had brought Marius to the Rue des Filles de Calvaire in the evening of the 6th of June. The coachman declared that on the 6th of June, in obedience to the commands of a police agent, he had stood from 3 o'clock in the afternoon until nightfall in the Quai du Champs-Élysées above the outlet of the Grand Sewer, that toward 9 o'clock in the evening the grating of the sewer which abuts on the bank of the river had opened, that a man had emerged therefrom, bearing on his shoulders another man, who seemed to be dead, that the agent who was on the watch at that point had arrested the living man and had seized the dead man, that at the order of the police agent he, the coachman, had taken all those folks into his carriage, that they had first driven to the Rue des Filles de Calvaire, that they had there deposited the dead man, that the dead man was Monsieur Marius, and that he, the coachman, recognized him perfectly, although he was alive this time, that afterwards they had entered the vehicle again, that he had whipped up his horses a few paces from the gates of the archives, they had called him to halt, that there in the street they had paid him and left him, and that the police agent had led the other man away, that he knew nothing more, that the night had been very dark. Marius, as we have said, recalled nothing. He only remembered that he had been seized from behind by an energetic hand at the moment when he was falling backwards into the barricade. Then everything vanished so far as he was concerned. He had only regained consciousness at Monsieur Gillenormand's. He was lost in conjectures. He could not doubt his own identity. Still, how could it have come to pass that, having fallen in the Rue de Javert, he had been picked up by the police agent on the banks of the Seine near the Pont des Invalides? Someone had carried him from the Quartier des Halles to the Champs-Élysées. And how? Through the sewer. Unheard of devotion. Someone. Who? This was the man for whom Marius was searching. Of this man, who was his savior, nothing, not a trace, not the faintest indication. Marius, although forced to preserve great reserve in that direction, pushed his inquiries as far as the prefecture of police. There, no more than elsewhere, did the information obtained lead to any enlightenment. The prefecture knew less about the matter than did the hackney coachman. They had no knowledge of any arrest having been made on the 6th of June at the mouth of the Grand Sewer. No report of any agent had been received there upon this matter, which was regarded at the prefecture as a fable. The invention of this fable was attributed to the coachman. A coachman who wants a gratuity is capable of anything, even of imagination. The fact was assured, nevertheless, and Marius could not doubt it, unless he doubted his own identity, as we have just said. Everything about this singular enigma was inexplicable. What had become of that man, that mysterious man whom the coachman had seen emerge from the grating of the Grand Sewer, bearing upon his back the unconscious Marius, and whom the police agent on the watch had arrested in the very act of rescuing an insurgent? What had become of the agent himself? Why had this agent preserved silence? Had the man succeeded in making his escape? Had he bribed the agent? Why did this man give no sign of life to Marius, who owed everything to him? His disinterestedness was no less tremendous than his devotion. Why had not that man appeared again? Perhaps he was above compensation, but no one is above gratitude. Was he dead? Who was the man? What sort of a face had he? No one could tell him this. The coachman answered. The night was very dark. Basque and Nicolette, all in a flutter, had looked only at their young master all covered with blood. The porter, whose candle had lighted the tragic arrival of Marius, had been the only one to take note of the man in question, and this is the description that he gave. That man was terrible. Marius had the blood-stained clothing which he had worn when he had been brought back to his grandfather preserved, in the hope that it would prove of service in his researches. On examining the coat, it was found that one skirt had been torn in a singular way. A piece was missing. One evening Marius was speaking in the presence of Cosette and Jean Valjean of the whole of that singular adventure, of the innumerable inquiries which he had made, and of the fruitlessness of his efforts. The cold countenance of Monsieur Fauchelevent angered him. He exclaimed with a vivacity which had something of wrath in it, "Yes, that man, whoever he may have been, was sublime. Do you know what he did, sir? He intervened like an archangel. He must have flung himself into the midst of the battle, have stolen me away, have opened the sewer, have dragged me into it, and have carried me through it. He must have traversed more than a league and a half in those frightful subterranean galleries, bent over, weighed down, in the dark, in the cesspool, more than a league and a half, sir, with a corpse upon his back. And with what object? With the sole object of saving the corpse, and that corpse I was. He said to himself, there may still be a glimpse of life there, perchance. I will risk my own existence for that miserable spark. And his existence he risked not only once, but 20 times. Every step there was danger. The proof of it is that on emerging from the sewer he was arrested. Do you know, sir, that that man did all this, and he had no recompense to expect? What was I, an insurgent? What was I, one of the conquered? Oh, if Cosette's 600,000 francs were mine—" "They are yours," interrupted Jean Valjean. "Well," resumed Marius, "I would give them all to find that man once more." Jean Valjean remained silent. End of Chapter 8, Book 5.
Chapter 1 of Book 6 of Les Misérables, Volume 5, by Victor Hugo. Les Misérables, Volume 5, by Victor Hugo. Translated by Isabel Florence Hapgood. Book 6, The Sleepless Night. Chapter 1, the 16th of February, 1833. The night of the 16th to the 17th of February, 1833, was a blessed night. Above its shadows, heaven stood open. It was the wedding night of Marius and Cosette. The day had been adorable. It had not been the grand festival dreamed by the grandfather, a fairy spectacle, with a confusion of cherubim and cupids over the heads of the bridal pair, a marriage worthy to form the subject of a painting to be placed over a door, but it had been sweet and smiling. The manner of marriage in 1833 was not the same as it is today. France had not yet borrowed from England that supreme delicacy of carrying off one's wife, of fleeing, on coming out of a church, of hiding oneself with shame from one's happiness, and of combining the ways of the bankrupt with the delights of the Song of Songs. People had not yet grasped to the full the chastity, exquisiteness, and decency of jolting their paradise in a posting-chaise, of breaking up their mystery with click-clacks, of taking for a nuptial bed the bed of an inn, and of leaving behind them in a commonplace chamber, at so much a night, the most sacred of the souvenirs of life, mingled pell-mell with the tete-a-tete of the conductor of the diligence and the maidservant of the inn. In the second half of the 19th century in which we are now living, the mayor and his scarf, the priest and his chasuble, the law and God no longer suffice. They must be eked out by the postilion de logement, a blue waistcoat turned up with red and with bell-buttons, a plaque like a vamp-brace, knee-breeches of green leather, odes to the Norman horses with their tails knotted up, false galloons, varnished hat, long powdered locks, an enormous whip and tall boots. France does not yet carry elegance to the length of doing like the English nobility, and raining down on the post-chaise of the bridal pair a hailstorm of slippers trodden down at heel, and of worn-out shoes in memory of Churchill, afterwards Marlborough or Malbrook, who was assailed on his wedding day by the wrath of an ant which brought him good luck. Old shoes and slippers do not, as yet, form a part of our nuptial celebrations, but patience, as good taste continues to spread, we shall come to that. In 1833, 100 years ago, marriage was not conducted at a full trot. Strange to say, at that epoch, people still imagined that a wedding was a private and a social festival, that a patriarchal banquet does not spoil a domestic solemnity, that gaiety, even in excess, provided it be honest and decent, does happiness no harm, and that, in short, it is a good and a venerable thing that the fusion of these two destinies, whence a family is destined to spring, should begin at home, and that the household should thenceforth have its nuptial chamber as its witness. And people were so immodest as to marry in their own homes. The marriage took place, therefore, in accordance with this now superannuated fashion, at M. Gillenormand's house. Natural and commonplace as this matter of marrying is, the banns to publish, the papers to be drawn up, the mayoralty, and the church produced some complication. They could not get ready before the 16th of February. Now, we note this detail for the pure satisfaction of being exact. It chanced that the 16th fell on Shrove Tuesday. Hesitations, scruples, particularly on the part of Aunt Gillenormand. Shrove Tuesday, exclaimed the grandfather, so much the better. There is a proverb, mariage un mardi gras n'aura point infini grave. Let us proceed. Here goes for the 16th. Do you want to delay, Marius? No, certainly not, replied the lover. Let us marry, then, cried the grandfather. Accordingly, the marriage took place on the 16th, notwithstanding the public merrymaking. It rained that day, but there is always in the sky a tiny scrap of blue at the service of happiness, which lovers see, even when the rest of creation is under an umbrella. On the preceding evening, Jean Valjean handed to Marius, in the presence of M. Gillenormand, the 584,000 francs. As the marriage was taking place under the regime of community of property, the papers had been simple. Henceforth, Toussaint was of no use to Jean Valjean. Cosette inherited her and promoted her to the rank of lady's maid. As for Jean Valjean, a beautiful chamber in the Gillenormand's house had been furnished expressly for him, and Cosette had said to him in such an irresistible manner, "Father, I entreat you," that she had almost persuaded him to promise that he would come and occupy it. A few days before that fixed on for marriage, an accident happened to Jean Valjean. He crushed the thumb of his right hand. This was not a serious matter. He had not allowed anyone to trouble himself about it, nor to dress it, nor even to see his hurt, not even Cosette. Nevertheless, this had forced him to swathe his hand in a linen bandage, and to carry his arm in a sling, and had prevented his signing. M. Gillenormand, in his capacity of Cosette's supervising guardian, had supplied his place. We will not conduct the reader either to the mayor's office or to the church. One does not follow a pair of lovers to that extent, and one is accustomed to turn one's back on the drama as soon as it puts a wedding nosegay in its buttonhole. We will confine ourselves to noting an incident which, though unnoticed by the wedding party, marked the transit from the Rue des Filets du Calvaire to the Church of St. Paul. At that epoch, the northern extremity of the Rue Saint-Louis was in process of repaving. It was barred off, beginning with the Rue des Royal. It was impossible for the wedding carriages to go directly to St. Paul. They were obliged to alter their course, and the simplest way was to turn through the boulevard. One of the invited guests observed that it was Shrove Tuesday, and that there would be a jam of vehicles. "Why?" asked M. Gillenormand. "Because of the maskers." "Capital," said the grandfather. "Let us go that way. These young folks are on the way to be married. They are about to enter the serious part of life. This will prepare them for seeing a bit of the masquerade." They went by way of the boulevard. The first wedding coach held Cosette and Aunt Gillenormand, M. Gillenormand, and Jean Valjean. Marius, still separated from his betrothed according to usage, did not come until the second. The nuptial train, on emerging from the Rue des Filets du Calvaire, became entangled in a long procession of vehicles which form an endless chain from the Madeleine to the Bastille, and from the Bastille to the Madeleine. Maskers abounded on the boulevard. In spite of the fact that it was raining at intervals, Merry Andrew, Pantaloon, and Clown persisted. In the good humor of that winter of 1833, Paris had disguised itself as Venice. Such Shrove Tuesdays are no longer to be seen nowadays. Everything which exists being a scattered carnival, there is no longer any carnival. The sidewalks were overflowing with pedestrians, and the windows with curious spectators. The terraces which crown the peristyles of the theatres were bordered with spectators. Besides the maskers, they stared at that procession, peculiar to Shrove Tuesday as to Longchamp, of vehicles of every description, citadines, tapissières, carrioles, cabriolets, marching in order, rigorously riveted to each other by the police regulations, and locked into rails, as it were. Anyone in these vehicles is at once a spectator and a spectacle. Police sergeants maintained, on the sides of the boulevard, these two interminable parallel files, moving in contrary directions, and saw to it that nothing interfered with that double current, those two brooks of carriages, flowing the one downstream, the other upstream, the one toward the Chaussée d'Antin, the other toward the Faubourg Saint-Antoine. The carriages of the peers of France and the ambassadors, emblazoned with coats of arms, held the middle of the way, going and coming freely. Certain joyous and magnificent trains, notably that of Boeuf-Gras, had the same privilege. In this gaiety of Paris, England cracked her whip. Lord Seymour's post-chaise, harassed by a nickname from the populace, passed with great noise. In the double file, along which the municipal guards galloped like sheep-dogs, honest family coaches, loaded down with great aunts and grandmothers, displayed at their doors fresh groups of children in disguise, clowns of 7 years of age, columbines of 6, ravishing little creatures who felt that they formed an official part of the public mirth, who were imbued with the dignity of the harlequinade, and who possessed the gravity of functionaries. From time to time, a hitch arose somewhere in the procession of vehicles. One or other of the two lateral files halted until the knot was disentangled. One carriage delayed sufficed to paralyze the whole line. Then they set out again on the march. The wedding carriages were in the file proceeding toward the Bastille, and skirting the right side of the boulevard. At the top of the Pont Choux there was a stoppage. Nearly at the same moment, the other file, which was proceeding toward the Madeleine, halted also. At that point of the file there was a carriage-load of maskers. These carriages, or to speak more correctly, these wagon-loads of maskers, are very familiar to Parisians. If they were missing on a Shrove Tuesday, or at the Mid-Lent, it would be taken in bad part, and people would say, "There's something behind that. Probably the ministry is about to undergo a change." A pile of Cassandras, Harlequins, and Columbines jolted along high above the passers-by, all possible grotesqueness, from the Turk to the savage, Hercules supporting Marquise, fishwives who would have made Rabelais stop up his ears, just as the Maenads made Aristophanes drop his eyes, tow wigs, pink tights, dandified hats, spectacles of a grimacer, three-cornered hats of Janot tormented with a butterfly, shouts directed at pedestrians, fists on hips, bold attitudes, bare shoulders, immodesty unchained, a chaos of shamelessness driven by a coachman crowned with flowers. This is what that institution was like. Greece stood in need of a chariot of Thespis. France stands in need of the hackney coach of Vede. Everything can be parodied, even parody. The Saturnalia, that grimace of antique beauty, ends through exaggeration after exaggeration in Shrove Tuesday, and the Bacchanal, formerly crowned with sprays of vine leaves and grapes, inundated with sunshine, displaying her marble breast in the divine semi-nudity, having at the present day lost her shape under the soaked rags of the north, has finally come to be called the Jack Pudding. The tradition of carriage-loads of maskers runs back to the most ancient days of the monarchy. The accounts of Louis XI allot to the bailiff of the palace 20 sous tourna for 3 coaches of masquerades in the crossroads. In our day, these noisy heaps of creatures are accustomed to have themselves driven in some ancient cuckoo carriage, whose imperial they load down, or they overwhelm a hired landau with its top thrown back, with their tumultuous groups. 20 of them ride in a carriage intended for 6. They cling to the seats, to the rumble, on the cheeks of the hood, on the shafts. They even bestride the carriage lamps. They stand, sit, lie, with their knees drawn up in a knot and their legs hanging. The women sit on the men's laps. Far away above the throng of heads, their wild pyramid is visible. These carriage loads form mountains of mirth in the midst of rout. Collet, Panard, and Piron flew from it, enriched with slang. This carriage, which has become colossal through its freight, has an air of conquest. Uproar reigns in front, tumult behind. People vociferate, shout, howl. There they break forth and writhe with enjoyment. Gaiety roars, sarcasm flames forth, joviality is flaunted like a red flag. 2 jades there drag farce blossomed forth in an apotheosis. It is the triumphal car of laughter. A laughter that is too cynical to be frank. In truth, this laughter is suspicious. This laughter has a mission. It is charged with proving the carnival to the Parisians. These fishwife vehicles, in which one feels one knows not what shadows, set the philosopher to thinking. There is government therein. There one lays one's finger on a mysterious affinity between public men and public women. It certainly is sad that turpitude, heaped up, should give a sum total of gaiety, that by piling ignominy upon opprobrium, the people should be enticed, that the system of spying and serving as caryatids to prostitution should amuse the rabble when it confronts them, that the crowd loves to behold that monstrous living pile of tinsel rags, half dung, half light, roll by on 4 wheels, howling and laughing, that they should clap their hands at this glory composed of all shames, that there would be no festival for the populace did not the police promenade in their midst these sorts of 20-headed hydras of joy. But what can be done about it? These beribboned and beflowered tumbrils of mire are insulted and pardoned by the laughter of the public. The laughter of all is the accomplice of universal degradation. Certain unhealthy festivals disaggregate the people and convert them into the populace. And populaces, like tyrants, require buffoons. The king has Roquelaure. The populace has the Merry Andrew. Paris is a great, mad city on every occasion that it is a great, sublime city. There the carnival forms part of politics. Paris, let us confess it, willingly allows infamy to furnish it with comedy. She only demands of her masters, when she has masters, one thing: paint me the mud. Rome was of the same mind. She loved Nero. Nero was a titanic lighterman. Chance ordained, as we have just said, that one of these shapeless clusters of masked men and women, dragged about on a vast calash, should halt on the left of the boulevard, while the wedding train halted on the right. The carriage-load of masks caught sight of the wedding carriage containing the bridal party opposite them on the other side of the boulevard. "Hullo," said a masker, "here's a wedding." "A sham wedding," retorted another. "We are the genuine article." And being too far off to accost the wedding party, and fearing also the rebuke of the police, the two maskers turned their eyes elsewhere. At the end of another minute, the carriage-load of maskers had their hands full. The multitude set to yelling, which is the crowd's caress to masquerades, and the two maskers, who had just spoken, had to face the throng with their comrades, and did not find the entire repertory of projectiles of the fish markets too extensive to retort to the enormous verbal attacks of the populace. A frightful exchange of metaphors took place between the maskers and the crowd. In the meanwhile, two other maskers in the same carriage, a Spaniard with an enormous nose, an elderly air and a huge black mustache, and a gaunt fishwife, who was quite a young girl, masked with a lute, had also noticed the wedding, and while their companions and the passers-by were exchanging insults, they had held a dialogue in a low voice. Their aside was covered by the tumult, and was lost in it. The gusts of rain had drenched the front of the vehicle, which was wide open. The breezes of February are not warm. As the fishwife, clad in a low-necked gown, replied to the Spaniard, she shivered, laughed, and coughed. Here is their dialogue. "Say now." "What, Daddy?" "Do you see that old cove?" "What old cove?" "Yonder in the first wedding card on our side." "The one with his arm hung up in a black cravat?" "Yes." "Well, I'm sure that I know him." "Ah." "I'm willing that they should cut my throat, and I'm ready to swear that I never said either you, thou, or I in my life if I don't know that Parisian. Paris and Pantin today. Can you see the bride if you stoop down? No. And the bridegroom? There's no bridegroom in that trap. Bah! Unless it's the old fellow. Try to get a sight of the bride by stooping very low. I can't. Never mind, that old cove who has something the matter with his paw, I know, and that I'm positive. And what good does it do to know him? No one can tell. Sometimes it does. I don't care a hang for old fellows. That I don't. I know him. Know him if you want to. How the devil does he come to be one of the wedding party? We're in it too. Where does that wedding come from? How should I know? Listen. Well, what? There's one thing you ought to do. What's that? Get off of our trap and spin that wedding. What for? To find out where it goes and what it is. Hurry up and jump down. Trot, my girl. Your legs are young. I can't quit the vehicle. Why not? I'm hired. Ah, the devil. I owe my fishwife day to the prefecture. That's true. If I leave the cart, the first inspector who gets his eye on me will arrest me. You know that well enough. Yes, I do. I'm bought by the government for today. All the same, that old fellow bothers me. Do the old fellows bother you? But you're not a young girl. He's in the first carriage. Well, in the bride's trap. What then? So he is the father. What concern is that of mine? I tell you that he's the father, as if he were the only father. Listen. What? I can't go out otherwise than masked. Here, I'm concealed. No one knows that I'm here. But tomorrow there will be no more maskers. It's Ash Wednesday. I run the risk of being nabbed. I must sneak back to my hole, but you are free. Not particularly. More than I am, at any rate. Well, what of that? You must try to find out where that wedding party went to. Where it went? Yes. I know. Where's it going, then? To the Cadran Bleu. In the first place, it's not in that direction. Well, to La Rapée. Or elsewhere. It's free. Wedding parties are at liberty. That's not the point at all. I tell you, you must try to learn for me what that wedding is, who that old cove belongs to, and where that wedding pair lives. I like that. That would be queer. It's so easy to find out a wedding party that passed through the street on a Shrove Tuesday a week afterwards. A pin in a haymow. It ain't possible. That don't matter. You must try. You understand me, Azelma. The two files resumed their movement on both sides of the boulevard, in opposite directions, and the carriage of the maskers lost sight of the trap of the bride. This concludes Book 6, Chapter 1 of Les Misérables. Chapter 2 of Book 6 of Les Misérables, Volume 5 by Victor Hugo. Les Misérables, Volume 5 by Victor Hugo, translated by Isabel Florence Hapgood. Book 6, The Sleepless Night. Chapter 2. Jean Valjean still wears his arm in a sling. To realize one's dream. To whom is this accorded? There must be elections for this in heaven. We are all candidates, unknown to ourselves. The angels vote. Cosette and Marius had been elected. Cosette, both at the mayor's office and at church, was dazzling and touching. Toussaint, assisted by Nicolette, had dressed her. Cosette wore a petticoat of white taffeta, her robe of bouche guipure, a veil of English point, a necklace of fine pearls, a wreath of orange flowers. All this was white, and from the midst of that whiteness she beamed forth. It was an exquisite candor, expanding and becoming transfigured in the light. One would have pronounced her a virgin on the point of turning into a goddess. Marius' handsome hair was lustrous and perfumed. Here and there, beneath the thick curls, pale lines, the scars of the barricade, were visible. The grandfather, haughty, with head held high, amalgamating more than ever in his toilette and his manners all the elegances of the epoch of Barras, escorted Cosette. He took the place of Jean Valjean, who, on account of his arm being still in a sling, could not give his hand to the bride. Jean Valjean, dressed in black, followed them with a smile. Monsieur Fauchelevent, said the grandfather to him, this is a fine day. I vote for the end of afflictions and sorrows. Henceforth there must be no sadness anywhere. Pardieu, I decree joy. Evil has no right to exist. That there should be any unhappy men is in sooth a disgrace to the azure of the sky. Evil does not come from man, who is good at bottom. All human miseries have for their capital and central government hell, otherwise known as the devil's Tuileries. Good, here I am uttering demagogical words. As far as I am concerned, I have no longer any political opinions. Let all me be rich, that is to say mirthful, and I confine myself to that. When, at the conclusion of all the ceremonies, after having pronounced before the mayor and before the priest all possible yeses, after having signed the registers at the municipality and at the sacristy, after having exchanged their rings, after having knelt side by side under the pall of white moire in the smoke of the censer, they arrived, hand in hand, admired and envied by all, Marius in black, she in white, preceded by the Suisse with the epaulet of a colonel, tapping the pavement with his halberd, between two rows of astonished spectators at the portals of the church, both leaves of which were thrown wide open, ready to enter their carriage again, and all being finished. Cosette still could not believe that it was real. She looked at Marius. She looked at the crowd. She looked at the sky. It seemed as though she feared that she should wake up from her dream. Her amazed and uneasy air added something indescribably enchanting to her beauty. They entered the same carriage to return home. Marius beside Cosette, M. Gillenormand and Jean Valjean sat opposite them. Aunt Gillenormand had withdrawn 1 degree and was in the second vehicle. "My children," said the grandfather, "here you are, Monsieur le Baron and Madame la Baronne, with an income of 30,000 livres." And Cosette, nestling close to Marius, caressed his ear with an angelic whisper. "So it is true. My name is Marius. I am Madame Thou." These two creatures were resplendent. They had reached that irrevocable and irrecoverable moment, at the dazzling intersection of all youth and all joy. They realized the verses of Jean Prouvaire. They were 40 years old, taken together. It was marriage, sublimated. These two children were two lilies. They did not see each other. They did not contemplate each other. Cosette perceived Marius in the midst of a glory. Marius perceived Cosette on an altar. And on that altar, and in that glory, the two apotheoses mingling in the background, one knows not how, behind a cloud for Cosette, in a flash for Marius, there was the ideal thing, the real thing, the meeting of the kiss and the dream, the nuptial pillow. All the torments through which they had passed came back to them in intoxication. It seemed to them that their sorrows, their sleepless nights, their tears, their anguish, their terrors, their despair, converted into caresses and rays of light, rendered still more charming the charming hour which was approaching, and that their griefs were but so many handmaidens who were preparing the toilet of joy. How good it is to have suffered! Their unhappiness formed a halo round their happiness. The long agony of their love was terminating in an ascension. It was the same enchantment in two souls, tinged with voluptuousness in Marius and with modesty in Cosette. They said to each other in low tones, "We will go back to take a look at our little garden in the Rue Plumet." The folds of Cosette's gown lay across Marius. Such a day is an ineffable mixture of dream and of reality. One possesses, and one supposes. One still has time before one to divine. The emotion on that day, of being at midday and of dreaming of midnight, is indescribable. The delights of these two hearts overflowed upon the crowd, and inspired the passers-by with cheerfulness. People halted in the Rue Saint-Antoine, in front of St. Paul, to gaze through the windows of the carriage at the orange flowers quivering on Cosette's head. Then they returned home, to the Rue des Filets du Calvaire. Marius, triumphant and radiant, mounted side by side with Cosette the staircase up which he had been borne in a dying condition. The poor, who had trooped to the door, and who shared their purses, blessed them. There were flowers everywhere. The house was no less fragrant than the church. After the incense, roses. They thought they heard voices caroling in the infinite. They had God in their hearts. Destiny appeared to them like a ceiling of stars. Above their heads they beheld the light of a rising sun. All at once the clock struck. Marius glanced at Cosette's charming bare arm, and at the rosy things which were vaguely visible through the lace of her bodice, and Cosette, intercepting Marius's glance, blushed to her very hair. Quite a number of old family friends of the Gillenormand family had been invited. They pressed about Cosette. Each one vied with the rest in saluting her as Madame la Baronne. The officer, Théodule Gillenormand, now a captain, had come from Chartres, where he was stationed in garrison, to be present at the wedding of his cousin Pontmercy. Cosette did not recognize him. He, on his side, habituated as he was to have women consider him handsome, retained no more recollection of Cosette than of any other woman. "How right I was not to believe in that story about the lancer," said Father Gillenormand to himself. Cosette had never been more tender with Jean Valjean. She was in unison with Father Gillenormand. While he erected joy into aphorisms and maxims, she exhaled goodness like a perfume. Happiness desires that all the world should be happy. She regained, for the purpose of addressing Jean Valjean, the inflections of voice belonging to the time when she was a little girl. She caressed him with her smile. A banquet had been spread in the dining-room. Illumination as brilliant as the daylight is the necessary seasoning of a great joy. Mist and obscurity are not accepted by the happy. They do not consent to be black. The night, yes. The shadows, no. If there is no sun, one must be made. The dining-room was full of gay things. In the center, above the white and glittering table, was a Venetian lustre with flat plates, with all sorts of colored birds, blue, violet, red, and green, perched amid the candles. Around the chandelier, girandoles. On the wall, sconces with triple and quintuple branches, mirrors, silverware, glassware, plate, porcelain, faience, pottery, gold and silversmith's work. All was sparkling and gay. The empty spaces between the candelabra were filled in with bouquets, so that where there was not a light, there was a flower. In the antechamber, 3 violins and a flute softly played quartets by Haydn. Jean Valjean had seated himself on a chair in the drawing-room, behind the door, the leaf of which folded back upon him in such a manner as to nearly conceal him. A few moments before they sat down to table, Cosette came, as though inspired by a sudden whim, and made him a deep curtsy. Spreading out her bridal toilet with both hands, and with a tenderly roguish glance, she asked him, "Father, are you satisfied?" "Yes," said Jean Valjean, "I am content." "Well, then laugh." Jean Valjean began to laugh. A few moments later, Basque announced that dinner was served. The guests, preceded by M. Gillenormand with Cosette on his arm, entered the dining-room, and arranged themselves in the proper order around the table. 2 large armchairs figured on the right and left of the bride, the first for M. Gillenormand, the other for Jean Valjean. M. Gillenormand took his seat. The other armchair remained empty. They looked about for M. Fauchelevent. He was no longer there. M. Gillenormand questioned Basque. "Do you know where M. Fauchelevent is?" "Sir," replied Basque, "I do, precisely. M. Fauchelevent told me to say to you, sir, that he was suffering, his injured hand was paining him somewhat, and that he could not dine with Monsieur le Baron and Madame la Baronne, that he begged to be excused, that he would come tomorrow. He has just taken his departure." That empty armchair chilled the effusion of the wedding feast for a moment. But if M. Fauchelevent was absent, M. Gillenormand was present, and the grandfather beamed for 2. He affirmed that M. Fauchelevent had done well to retire early if he were suffering, but that it was only a slight ailment. This declaration sufficed. Moreover, what is an obscure corner in such a submersion of joy? Cosette and Marius were passing through one of those egotistical and blessed moments when no other faculty is left to a person than that of receiving happiness. And then an idea occurred to M. Gillenormand. "Pardieu, this armchair is empty. Come hither, Marius. Your aunt will permit it, although she has a right to you. This armchair is for you. That is legal and delightful. Fortunatus beside Fortunata." Applause from the whole table. Marius took Jean Valjean's place beside Cosette, and things fell out so that Cosette, who had at first been saddened by Jean Valjean's absence, ended by being satisfied with it. From the moment when Marius took his place, and was the substitute, Cosette would not have regretted God himself. She set her sweet little foot, shod in white satin, on Marius's foot. The armchair being occupied, M. Fauchelevent was obliterated, and nothing was lacking. And 5 minutes afterward, the whole table from one end to the other was laughing with all the animation of forgetfulness. At dessert, M. Gillenormand, rising to his feet, with a glass of champagne in his hand, only half full so that the palsy of his 80 years might not cause an overflow, proposed the health of the married pair. "You shall not escape 2 sermons," he exclaimed. "This morning you had one from the curé. This evening you shall have one from your grandfather. Listen to me. I will give you a bit of advice. Adore each other. I do not make a pack of gyrations. I go straight to the mark. Be happy. In all creation, only the turtle doves are wise. Philosophers say, moderate your joys. I say, give rein to your joys. Be as much smitten with each other as fiends. Be in a rage about it. The philosophers talk stuff and nonsense. I should like to stuff their philosophy down their gullets again. Can there be too many perfumes, too many open rosebuds, too many nightingales singing, too many green leaves, too much aurora in life? Can people love each other too much? Can people please each other too much? Take care, Estelle, thou art too pretty. Have a care, Nemorin, thou art too handsome. Fine stupidity, in sooth. Can people enchant each other too much, cajole each other too much, charm each other too much? Can one be too much alive, too happy? Moderate your joys, ah, indeed, down with the philosophers. Wisdom consists in jubilation. Make merry, let us make merry. Are we happy because we are good, or are we good because we are happy? Is the Sancy diamond called the Sancy because it belonged to Harley de Sancy, or because it weighs 600 carats? I know nothing about it. Life is full of such problems. The important point is to possess the sensé and happiness. Let us be happy without quibbling and quirking. Let us obey the sun blindly. What is the sun? It is love. He who says love says woman. Ah, behold omnipotence, women. Ask that demagogue of a Marius if he is not the slave of that little tyrant of a Cosette, and of his own free will, too, the coward. Woman, there is no Robespierre who keeps his place, but women reigns. I am no longer royalist, except toward that royalty. What is Adam? The kingdom of Eve. No 89 for Eve. There has been the royal scepter surmounted by a fleur-de-lis. There has been the imperial scepter surmounted by a globe. There has been the scepter of Charlemagne, which was of iron. There has been the scepter of Louis the Great, which was of gold. The Revolution twisted them between its thumb and forefinger. Halfpenny straws. It is done with, it is broken, it lies on the earth. There is no longer any scepter. But make me a revolution against that little embroidered handkerchief which smells of patchouli. I should like to see you do it. Try. Why is it so solid? Because it is a gewgaw. Ah, you are the 19th century? Well, what then? And we have been as foolish as you. Do not imagine that you have effected much change in the universe, because your tripcollant is called the cholera marbus, and because your puree is called the cachuca. In fact, the women must always be loved. I defy you to escape from that. These friends are our angels. Yes, love, women. The kiss forms a circle from which I defy you to escape, and for my own part, I should be only too happy to re-enter it. Which of you has seen the planet Venus, the coquette of the abyss, the Sillimene of the ocean, rise in the infinite, calming all here below? The ocean is a rough Alcestis. Well, grumble as he will, when Venus appears he is forced to smile. That brute beast submits. We are all made so. Wrath, tempest, claps of thunder, foam to the very ceiling. A woman enters on the scene. A planet rises, flat on your face. Marius was fighting 6 months ago. Today he is married. That is well. Yes, Marius. Yes, Cosette, you are in the right. Exist boldly for each other. Make us burst with rage that we cannot do the same. Idealize each other. Catch in your beaks all the tiny blades of felicity that exist on the earth, and arrange yourselves a nest for life. Pardi, to love, to be loved, what a fine miracle when one is young. Don't imagine that you invented that. I too have had my dream. I too have meditated. I too have sighed. I too have had a moonlight soul. Love is a child, 6,000 years old. Love has the right to a long white beard. Methusalem is a street Arab beside Cupid. For 60 centuries, men and women have got out of their scrape by loving. The devil, who is cunning, took to hating man. Man, who is still more cunning, took to loving women. In this way, he does more good than the devil does him harm. This craft was discovered in the days of the terrestrial paradise. The invention is old, my friends, but it is perfectly new. Profit by it. Be Daphnis and Chloe, while waiting to become Philemon and Baucis. Manage so that, when you are with each other, nothing shall be lacking to you, and that Cosette may be the sun for Marius, and that Marius may be the universe to Cosette. Cosette, let your fine weather be the smile of your husband. Marius, let your rain be your wife's tears, and let it never rain in your household. You have filched the winning number in the lottery. You have gained the great prize. Guard it well. Keep it under lock and key. Do not squander it. Adore each other and snap your fingers at all the rest. Believe what I say to you. It is good sense, and good sense cannot lie. Be a religion to each other. Each man has his own fashion of adoring God. Saperlotte. The best way to adore God is to love one's wife. I love thee. That's my catechism. He who loves is orthodox. The oath of Henri IV places sanctity somewhere between feasting and drunkenness. Ventre sans gris. I don't belong to the religion of that oath. Woman is forgotten in it. This astonishes me on the part of Henri IV. My friends, long live women. I am old, they say. It's astonishing how much I feel in the mood to be young. I should like to go and listen to the bagpipes in the woods. Children who contrive to be beautiful and contented, that intoxicates me. I would like greatly to get married, if anyone would have me. It is impossible to imagine that God could have made us for anything but this. To idolize, to coo, to preen ourselves, to be dove-like, to be dainty, to bill and coo our loves from morn to night, to gaze at one's image in one's little wife, to be proud, to be triumphant, to plume oneself. That is the aim of life. There, let not that displease you, which we used to think in our day when we were young folks. Ah, vertu bamboche! What charming women there were in those days, and what pretty little faces and lovely lasses! I committed my ravages among them. Then love each other. If people did not love each other, I really do not see what use there would be in having any springtime. And for my own part, I should pray the good God to shut up all the beautiful things that he shows us, and to take away from us and put back in his box the flowers, the birds, the pretty maidens. My children, receive an old man's blessing. The evening was gay, lively, and agreeable. The grandfather's sovereign good humor gave the keynote to the whole feast, and each person regulated his conduct on that almost centenarian cordiality. They danced a little, they laughed a great deal. It was an amiable wedding. Goodman days of yore might have been invited to it. However, he was present in the person of Father Gillenormand. There was a tumult, then silence. The married pair disappeared. A little after midnight, the Gillenormand house became a temple. Here we pause. On the threshold of wedding nights stands a smiling angel with his finger on his lips. The soul enters into contemplation before that sanctuary where the celebration of love takes place. There should be flashes of light athwart such houses. The joys which they contain ought to make its escape through the stones of the walls in brilliancy and vaguely illuminate the gloom. It is impossible that this sacred and fatal festival should not give off a celestial radiance to the infinite. Love is the sublime crucible wherein the fusion of the man and the woman takes place, the being one, the being triple, the being final. The human trinity proceeds from it. This birth of two souls into one ought to be an emotion for the gloom. The lover is the priest. The ravaged virgin is terrified. Something of that joy ascends to God. Where true marriage is, that is to say, where there is love, the ideal enters in. A nuptial bed makes a nook of dawn amid the shadows. If it were given to the eye of the flesh to scan the formidable and charming visions of the upper life, it is probable that we should behold the forms of night, the winged unknowns, the blue passers of the invisible. Bend down, a throng of somber heads, around the luminous house, satisfied, showering benedictions, pointing out to each other the virgin wife gently alarmed, sweetly terrified, and bearing the reflection of human bliss upon their divine countenances. If at that supreme hour the wedded pair, dazzled with voluptuousness and believing themselves alone, were to listen, they would hear in their chamber a confused rustling of wings. Perfect happiness implies a mutual understanding with the angels. That dark little chamber has all heaven for its ceiling. When two mouths, rendered sacred by love, approach to create, it is impossible that there should not be, above that ineffable kiss, a quivering throughout the immense mystery of stars. These felicities are the true ones. There is no joy outside of these joys. Love is the only ecstasy. All the rest weeps. To love or to have loved, this suffices. Demand nothing more. There is no other pearl to be found in the shadowy folds of life. To love is a fulfillment. End of Book 6, Chapter 2.
Chapter 3 of Book 6 of Les Misérables, Volume 5 by Victor Hugo. Les Misérables, Volume 5 by Victor Hugo, translated by Isabel Florence Hapgood. Book 6, The Sleepless Night. Chapter 3, The Inseparable. What had become of Jean Valjean? Immediately after having laughed at Cosette's graceful command when no one was paying any heed to him, Jean Valjean had risen and had gained the antechamber unperceived. This was the very room which, 8 months before, he had entered black with mud, with blood and powder, bringing back the grandson to the grandfather. The old wainscoting was garlanded with foliage and flowers. The musicians were seated on the sofa on which they had laid Marius down. Basque, in a black coat, knee breeches, white stockings, and white gloves, was arranging roses round all of the dishes that were to be served. Jean Valjean pointed to his arm in its sling, charged Basque to explain his absence, and went away. The long windows of the dining-room opened on the street. Jean Valjean stood for several minutes, erect and motionless in the darkness, beneath those radiant windows. He listened. The confused sounds of the banquet reached his ear. He heard the loud, commanding tones of the grandfather, the violins, the clatter of the plates, the bursts of laughter, and through all that merry uproar he distinguished Cosette's sweet and joyous voice. He quitted the Rue des Filles du Calvaire, and returned to the Rue de l'Homme. In order to return thither, he took the Rue Saint-Louis, the Rue Culture Sainte-Catherine, and the Blanc-Manteau. It was a little longer, but it was the road through which, for the last 3 months, he had become accustomed to pass every day on his way from the Rue de l'Homme to the Rue des Filles du Calvaire, in order to avoid the obstructions and the mud in the Rue Vieille du Temple. This road, through which Cosette had passed, excluded for him all possibility of any other itinerary. Jean Valjean entered his lodgings. He lighted his candle and mounted the stairs. The apartment was empty. Even Toussaint was no longer there. Jean Valjean's step made more noise than usual in the chambers. All the cupboards stood open. He penetrated to Cosette's bedroom. There were no sheets on the bed. The pillow, covered with ticking, and without a case or lace, was laid on the blankets folded up on the foot of the mattress, whose covering was visible, under which no one was ever to sleep again. All the little feminine objects which Cosette was attached to had been carried away. Nothing remained except the heavy furniture and the 4 walls. Toussaint's bed was despoiled in a like manner. One bed only was made up, and seemed to be waiting someone, and this was Jean Valjean's bed. Jean Valjean looked at the walls, closed some of the cupboard doors, and went and came from one room to another. Then he sought his own chamber once more, and set his candle on a table. He had disengaged his arm from the sling, and he used his right hand as though it did not hurt him. He approached his bed, and his eyes rested, was it by chance, was it intentionally, on the inseparable of which Cosette had been jealous, on the little portmanteau which never left him. On his arrival in the Rue de l'Homme on the 4th of June, he had deposited it on a round table near the head of his bed. He went to this table with a sort of vivacity, took a key from his pocket, and opened the valise. From it he slowly drew forth the garments in which, 10 years before, Cosette had quitted Montfermeil. First the little gown, then the black fichu, then the stout, coarse child's shoes, which Cosette might almost have worn still, so tiny were her feet, and the fustian bodice, which was very thick, then the knitted petticoat, next the apron with the pockets, then the woollen stockings. These stockings, which still preserved the graceful form of a tiny leg, were no longer than Jean Valjean's hand. All this was black of hue. It was he who had brought those garments to Montfermeil for her. As he removed them from the valise, he laid them on the bed. He fell to thinking. He called up memories. It was in winter, in a very cold month of December. She was shivering, half naked, in rags. Her poor little feet were all red in their wooden shoes. He, Jean Valjean, had made her abandon those rags to clothe herself in these mourning habiliments. The mother must have felt pleased in her grave to see her daughter wearing mourning for her, and above all, to see that she was properly clothed, and that she was warm. He thought of that forest of Montfermeil. They had traversed it together, Cosette and he. He thought of what the weather had been, of the leafless trees, of the wood destitute of birds, of the sunless sky. It mattered not, it was charming. He arranged the tiny garments on the bed, the fichu next to the petticoat, the stockings beside the shoes, and he looked at them, one after the other. She was no taller than that. She had a big doll in her arms. She had put a louis d'or in the pocket of that apron. She had laughed. They walked hand in hand. She had no one in the world but him. Then his venerable white head fell forward on the bed. That stoical old heart broke. His face was engulfed, so to speak, in Cosette's garments, and if anyone had passed up the stairs at that moment, he would have heard frightful sobs. End of Book 6, Chapter 3. Read by Anka. Chapter 4 of Book 6 of Les Misérables, Volume 5 by Victor Hugo. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Les Misérables, Volume 5 by Victor Hugo. Translated by Isabel Florence Hapgood. Book 6, The Sleepless Night. Chapter 4, The Immortal Liver. The old and formidable struggle, of which we have already witnessed so many phases, began once more. Jacob struggled with the angel but one night. Alas, how many times have we beheld Jean Valjean seized bodily by his conscience, in the darkness and struggling desperately against it. Unheard of conflict. At certain moments the foot slips, at other moments the ground crumbles away underfoot. How many times had that conscience, mad for the good, clasped and overthrown him? How many times had the truth set her knee inexorably upon his breast? How many times, hurled to earth by the light, had he begged for mercy? How many times had that implacable spark lighted within him and upon him by the bishop, dazzled him by force when he had wished to be blind? How many times had he risen to his feet in the combat, held fast to the rock, leaning against sophism, dragged in the dust, now getting the upper hand of his conscience, again overthrown by it? How many times after an equivoque, after the specious and treacherous reasoning of egotism, had he heard his irritated conscience cry in his ear, "A trip, you wretch!" How many times had his refractory thoughts rattled convulsively in his throat, under the evidence of duty? Resistance to God, funereal sweats, what secret wounds which he alone felt bleed, what excoriations in his lamentable existence! How many times had he risen bleeding, bruised, broken, enlightened, despair in his heart, serenity in his soul, and, vanquished, he had felt himself the conqueror, and after having dislocated, broken, and rent his conscience with red-hot pincers, it had said to him as it stood over him, formidable, luminous, and tranquil, "Now go in peace." But on emerging from so melancholy a conflict, what a lugubrious peace, alas! Nevertheless, that night Jean Valjean felt that he was passing through his final combat. A heart-rending question presented itself. Predestinations are not all direct. They do not open out in a straight avenue before the predestined man. They have blind courts, impassable alleys, obscure turns, disturbing crossroads offering the choice of many ways. Jean Valjean had halted at that moment at the most perilous of these crossroads. He had come to the supreme crossing of good and evil. He had that gloomy intersection beneath his eyes. On this occasion once more, as had happened to him already in other sad vicissitudes, two roads opened out before him, the one tempting, the other alarming. Which was he to take? He was counselled to the one which alarmed him by that mysterious index finger which we all perceive whenever we fix our eyes on the darkness. Once more Jean Valjean had the choice between the terrible port and the smiling ambush. Is it then true? The soul may recover, but not fate. Frightful thing, an incurable destiny. This is the problem which presented itself to him. In what manner was Jean Valjean to behave in relation to the happiness of Cosette and Marius? It was he who had willed that happiness. It was he who had brought it about. He had himself buried it in his entrails, and at that moment when he reflected on it, he was able to enjoy the sort of satisfaction which an armourer would experience on recognizing his factory mark on a knife, on withdrawing it, all smoking, from his own breast. Cosette had Marius, Marius possessed Cosette. They had everything, even riches, and this was his doing. But what was he, Jean Valjean, to do with this happiness, now that it existed, now that it was there? Should he force himself on this happiness? Should he treat it as belonging to him? No doubt Cosette did belong to another, but should he, Jean Valjean, retain of Cosette all that he could retain? Should he remain the sort of father, half seen but respected, which he had hitherto been? Should he, without saying a word, bring his past to that future? Should he present himself there, as though he had a right? And should he seat himself, veiled, at that luminous fireside? Should he take those innocent hands into his tragic hands, with a smile? Should he place upon the peaceful fender of the Gillenormand drawing-room those feet of his, which dragged behind them the disgraceful shadow of the law? Should he enter into participation in the fair fortunes of Cosette and Marius? Should he render the obscurity on his brow and the cloud upon theirs still more dense? Should he place his catastrophe as a third associate in their felicity? Should he continue to hold his peace? In a word, should he be the sinister mute of destiny beside these two happy beings? We must become habituated to fatality and to encounters with it, in order to have the daring to raise our eyes when certain questions appear to us in all their horrible nakedness. Good or evil stands behind this severe interrogation point. "What are you going to do?" demands the Sphinx. This habit of trial Jean Valjean possessed. He gazed intently at the Sphinx. He examined the pitiless problem under all its aspects. Cosette, that charming existence, was the raft of his shipwreck. What was he to do? To cling fast to it, or to let go his hold? If he clung to it, he should emerge from disaster. He should ascend again into the sunlight. He should let the bitter water drip from his garments and his hair. He was saved, he should live. And if he let go his hold? Then the abyss. Thus he took sad counsel with his thoughts. Or, to speak more correctly, he fought. He kicked furiously internally, now against his will, now against his conviction. Happily for Jean Valjean that he had been able to weep. That relieved him possibly. But the beginning was savage. A tempest, more furious than the one which had formerly driven him to Arras, broke loose with him. The past surged up before him, facing the present. He compared them, and sobbed. The silence of tears once opened, the despairing man writhed. He felt that he had been stopped short. Alas! In this fight to the death between our egotism and our duty, when we thus retreat step by step before our immutable ideal, bewildered, furious, exasperated at having to yield, disputing the ground, hoping for a possible flight, seeking an escape, what an abrupt and sinister resistance does the foot of the wall offer in our rear? To feel the sacred shadow which forms an obstacle. The invisible inexorable, what an obsession! Then one is never done with conscience. Make your choice, Brutus, make your choice, Cato. It is fathomless, since it is God. One flings into that well the labour of one's whole life. One flings in one's fortune. One flings in one's riches. One flings in one's success. One flings in one's liberty or fatherland. One flings in one's well-being. One flings in one's repose. One flings in one's joy. More, more, more. Empty the vase, tip the urn. One must finish by flinging in one's heart. Somewhere in the fog of the ancient hells there is a ton like that. Is not one pardonable if one at last refuses? Can the inexhaustible have any right? Are not chains which are endless above human strength? Who would blame Sisyphus and Jean Valjean for saying, "It is enough"? The obedience of matter is limited by friction. Is there no limit to the obedience of the soul? If perpetual motion is impossible, can perpetual self-sacrifice be exacted? The first step is nothing, it is the last which is difficult. What was the Champmathieu affair in comparison with Cosette's marriage, and of that which it entailed? What is a re-entrance into the galleys compared to entrance into the void? O first step that must be descended, how sombre art thou! O second step, how black art thou! How could he refrain from turning aside his head this time? Martyrdom is sublimination, corrosive sublimination. It is a torture which consecrates. One can consent to it for the first hour. One seats oneself on the throne of glowing iron. One places on one's head the crown of hot iron. One accepts the globe of red-hot iron. One takes the sceptre of red-hot iron. But the mantle of flame still remains to be donned, and comes there not a moment when the miserable flesh revolts, and when one abdicates from suffering? At length Jean Valjean entered into the peace of exhaustion. He weighed, he reflected, he considered the alternatives, the mysterious balance of light and darkness. Should he impose his galleys on those two dazzling children, or should he consummate his irremediable engulfment by himself? On one side lay the sacrifice of Cosette, on the other that of himself. At what solution should he arrive? What decision did he come to? What resolution did he take? What was his own inward definitive response to the unbribable interrogatory of fatality? What door did he decide to open? Which side of his life did he resolve upon closing and condemning? Among all the unfathomable precipices which surrounded him, which was his choice? What extremity did he accept? To which of the gulfs did he nod his head? His dizzy reverie lasted all night long. He remained there until daylight, in the same attitude, bent double over that bed, prostrate beneath the enormity of fate, crushed, perchance, alas, with clenched fists, with arms outspread at right angles, like a man crucified who has been unnailed and flung face down on the earth. There he remained for 12 hours, the 12 hours of a long winter's night, ice cold, without once raising his head, and without uttering a word. He was as motionless as a corpse, while his thoughts wallowed on the earth and soared, now like the hydra, now like the eagle. Any one to behold him thus motionless would have pronounced him dead. All at once he shuddered convulsively, and his mouth, glued to Cosette's garments, kissed them. Then it could be seen that he was alive. Who could see, since Jean Valjean was alone and there was no one there? The one who is in the shadows. End of Book 6, Chapter 4.
Chapter 1 of Book 7 of Les Misérables, Volume 5, by Victor Hugo. Les Misérables, Volume 5, by Victor Hugo, translated by Isabel Florence Hapgood. Book 7. Chapter 1. The Seventh Circle and the Eighth Heaven. The days that follow weddings are solitary. People respect the meditations of the happy pair, and also their tardy slumbers to some degree. The tumult of visits and congratulations only begins later on. On the morning of the 17th of February, it was a little past midday, when Basque, with napkin and feather duster under his arm, busy in setting his antechamber to rights, heard a light tap at the door. There had been no ring, which was discreet on such a day. Basque opened the door, and beheld Monsieur Fauchelevent. He introduced him into the drawing-room, still encumbered and topsy-turvy, and which bore the air of a field of battle after the joys of the preceding evening. "Dame, sir," remarked Basque, "we all woke up late." "Is your master up?" asked Jean Valjean. "How is Monsieur's arm?" replied Basque. "Better." "Is your master up?" "Which one, the old one or the new one?" "Monsieur Pontmercy." "Monsieur le Baron," said Basque, drawing himself up. "A man is a baron most of all to his servants. He counts for something with them. They are what a philosopher would call bespattered with the title, and that flatters them. Marius, be it said in passing, a militant republican as he had proved, was now a baron in spite of himself. A small revolution had taken place in the family in connection with this title. It was now Monsieur Gillenormand who clung to it, and Marius who detached himself from it. But Colonel Pontmercy had written, "My son will bear my title." Marius obeyed, and then Cosette, in whom the woman was beginning to dawn, was delighted to be a baroness. "Monsieur le Baron," repeated Basque, "I will go and see. I will tell him that Monsieur Fauchelevent is here." "No, do not tell him that it is I. Tell him that someone wishes to speak to him in private, and mention no name." "Ah!" ejaculated Basque. "I wish to surprise him." "Ah!" ejaculated Basque once more, emitting his second "ah" as an explanation of the first, and he left the room. Jean Valjean remained alone. The drawing-room, as we have said, was in great disorder. It seemed as though, by lending an air, one might still hear the vague noise of the wedding. On the polished floor lay all sorts of flowers, which had fallen from garlands and head-dresses. The wax candles, burned to stumps, added stalactites of wax to the crystal drops of the chandeliers. Not a single piece of furniture was in its place. In the corners, 3 or 4 armchairs drawn close together in a circle had the appearance of continuing a conversation. The whole effect was cheerful. A certain grace still lingers round a dead feast. It has been a happy thing. On the chairs in disarray, among those fading flowers, beneath those extinct lights, people have thought of joy. The sun had receded to the chandelier and made its way gaily into the drawing-room. Several minutes elapsed. Jean Valjean stood motionless on the spot where Basque had left him. He was very pale. His eyes were hollow and so sunken in his head by sleeplessness that they nearly disappeared in their orbits. His black coat bore the weary folds of a garment that has been up all night. The elbows were whitened with the down which the friction of cloth against linen leaves behind it. Jean Valjean stared at the window outlined on the polished floor at his feet by the sun. There came a sound at the door, and he raised his eyes. Marius entered, his head well up, his mouth smiling, an indescribable light on his countenance, his brow expanded, his eyes triumphant. He had not slept either. "It is you, father," he exclaimed, in catching sight of Jean Valjean. "That idiot of a Basque had such a mysterious air, but you have come too early. It is only 12:30. Cosette is asleep." That word father, said to M. Fauchelevent by Marius, signified supreme felicity. There had always existed, as the reader knows, a lofty wall, a coldness, and a constraint between them, ice which must be broken or melted. Marius had reached that point of intoxication when the wall was lowered, when the ice dissolved, and when M. Fauchelevent was to him, as to Cosette, a father. He continued, his words poured forth as in the peculiarity of divine paroxysms of joy. "How glad I am to see you! If you only knew how we missed you yesterday! Good morning, father. How is your hand? Better, is it not?" And satisfied with the favorable reply which he had made to himself, he pursued, "We have both been talking about you. Cosette loves you so dearly. You must not forget that you have a chamber here. We want nothing more to do with the Rue de l'Homme Armé. We will have no more of it at all. How could you go to live in a street like that, which is sickly, which is disagreeable, which is ugly, which has a barrier at one end where one is cold and into which one cannot enter? You are to come and install yourself here, and this very day, or you will have to deal with Cosette. She means to lead us all by the nose, I warn you. You have your own chamber here. It is close to ours. It opens in the garden. The trouble with the clock has been attended to. The bed is made. It is all ready. You have only to take possession of it. Near your bed Cosette has placed a huge old easy-chair covered with ultrant velvet, and she has said to it, 'Stretch out your arms to him.' A nightingale comes to the clump of acacias opposite your windows every spring. In 2 months more you will have it. You will have its nest on your left and ours on your right. By night it will sing, and by day Cosette will prattle. Your chamber faces due south. Cosette will arrange your books for you, your voyages of Captain Cook and the other Vancouvers, and all your affairs. I believe that there is a little valise to which you are attached. I have fixed upon a corner of honor for that. You have conquered my grandfather. You suit him. We will live together. Do you play whist? You will overwhelm my grandfather with delight if you play whist. It is you who shall take Cosette to walk on the days when I am at the courts, and you shall give her your arm, as you used to in the Luxembourg. We are absolutely resolved to be happy, and you shall be included in it, in our happiness. Do you hear, father? Come, will you breakfast with us today?" "Sir," said Jean Valjean, "I have something to say to you. I am an ex-convict." The limit of shrill sounds perceptible can be overleaped, as well in the case of the mind as in that of the ear. These words, "I am an ex-convict," proceeding from the mouth of Monsieur Fauchelevent and entering the ear of Marius, overshot the possible. It seemed to him that something had just been said to him, but he did not know what. He stood with his mouth wide open. Then he perceived that the man who was addressing him was frightful. Wholly absorbed in his own dazzled state, he had not, up to that moment, observed the other man's terrible pallor. Jean Valjean untied the black cravat which supported his right arm, unrolled the linen from around his hand, bared his thumb, and showed it to Marius. "There is nothing the matter with my hand," said he. Marius looked at the thumb. "There has not been anything the matter with it," went on Jean Valjean. "There was, in fact, no trace of an injury." Jean Valjean continued. "It was fitting that I should be absent from your marriage. I absented myself as much as was in my power. So I invented this injury in order that I might not commit a forgery, that I might not introduce a flaw into the marriage documents, in order that I might escape from signing." Marius stammered. "What is the meaning of this?" "The meaning of it is," replied Jean Valjean, "that I have been in the galleys." "You are driving me mad!" exclaimed Marius in terror. "Monsieur Pontmercy," said Jean Valjean, "I was 19 years in the galleys, for theft. Then I was condemned to life for theft, for a second offense. At the present moment I have broken my ban." In vain did Marius recoil before the reality, refuse the fact, resist the evidence. He was forced to give way. He began to understand, and, as always happens in such cases, he understood too much. An inward shudder of hideous enlightenment flashed through him. An idea which made him quiver traversed his mind. He caught a glimpse of a wretched destiny for himself in the future. "Say all! Say all!" he cried. "You are Cosette's father!" And he retreated a couple of paces with a movement of indescribable horror. Jean Valjean elevated his head with so much majesty of attitude that he seemed to grow even to the ceiling. "It is necessary that you should believe me here, sir, although our oath to others may not be received in law." Here he paused, then, with a sort of sovereign and spectral authority, he added, articulating slowly and emphasizing the syllables, "You will believe me. I, the father of Cosette, before God, no. Monsieur le Baron Pontmercy, I am a peasant of Faverolles. I earned my living by pruning trees. My name is not Fauchelevent, but Jean Valjean. I am not related to Cosette, reassure yourself." Marius stammered. "Who will prove that to me?" "I, since I tell you so." Marius looked at the man. He was melancholy yet tranquil. No lie could proceed from such a calm. That which is icy is sincere. The truth could be felt in that chill of the tomb. "I believe you," Marius said. Jean Valjean bent his head as though taking note of this, and continued, "What am I to Cosette, a passer-by? 10 years ago I did not know that she was in existence. I love her, it is true. One loves a child whom one has seen when very young, being old oneself. When one is old, one feels oneself a grandfather toward all little children. You may, it seems to me, suppose that I have something which resembles a heart. She was an orphan, without either father or mother. She needed me. That is why I began to love her. Children are so weak that the first comer, even a man like me, can become their protector. I have fulfilled this duty toward Cosette. I do not think that so slight a thing can be called a good action, but if it be a good action, well, say that I have done it. Register this attenuating circumstance. Today, Cosette passes out of my life. Our two roads part. Henceforth I can do nothing for her. She is Madame Pontmercy. Her providence has changed, and Cosette gains by the change. All is well. As for the 600,000 francs, you do not mention them to me, but I forestall your thought. They are in deposit. How did that deposit come into my hands? What does that matter? I restore the deposit. Nothing more can be demanded of me. I complete the restitution by announcing my true name. That concerns me. I have a reason for desiring that you should know who I am. And Jean Valjean looked Marius full in the face. All that Marius experienced was tumultuous and incoherent. Certain gusts of destiny produce these billows in our souls. We have all undergone moments of trouble in which everything within us is dispersed. We say the first things that occur to us, which are not always precisely those which should be said. There are sudden revelations which one cannot bear, and which intoxicate like baleful wine. Marius was stupefied by the novel situation which presented itself to him, to the point of addressing that man almost like a person who was angry with him for this avowal. "But why," he exclaimed, "do you tell me all this? Who forces you to do so? You could have kept your secret to yourself. You are neither denounced, nor tracked, nor pursued. You have a reason for wantonly making such a revelation. Conclude. There is something more. In what connection do you make this confession? What is your motive?" "My motive?" replied Jean Valjean in a voice so low and dull that one would have said that he was talking to himself rather than Marius. From what motive, in fact, has this convict just said, "I am a convict"? Well, yes, the motive is strange. It is out of honesty. Stay, the unfortunate point is that I have a thread in my heart which keeps me fast. It is when one is old that that sort of thread is particularly solid. All life falls in ruin around one resists. Had I been able to tear out that thread, to break it, to undo the knot or to cut it, to go far away, I should have been safe. I had only to go away. There are diligences in the Rue Bouloy. You are happy. I am going. I have tried to break that thread. I have jerked at it. It would not break. I tore my heart with it. Then I said, I cannot live anywhere else than here. I must stay. Well, yes, you are right. I am a fool. Why not simply remain here? You offer me a chamber in this house. Madame Pontmercy is sincerely attached to me. She said to the armchair, "Stretch out your arms to him." Your grandfather demands nothing better than to have me. I suit him. We shall live together and take our meals in common. I shall give Cosette my arm. Madame Pontmercy, excuse me, it is a habit. We shall have but one roof, one table, one fire, the same chimney corner in winter, the same promenade in summer. That is joy. That is happiness. That is everything. We shall live as one family, one family. At the word, Jean Valjean became wild. He folded his arms, glared at the floor beneath his feet, as though he would have evacuated an abyss therein, and his voice suddenly rose in thundering tones. As one family! No, I belong to no family. I do not belong to yours. I do not belong to any family of men. In houses where people are among themselves, I am superfluous. There are families, but there is nothing of the sort for me. I am an unlucky wretch. I am left outside. Did I have a father and mother? I almost doubt it. On the day when I gave that child in marriage, all came to an end. I have seen her happy, and that she is with a man whom she loves, and that there exists here a kind old man, a household of 2 angels, and all joys in that house, and that is well. I said to myself, enter thou not. I could have lied, it is true, have deceived you all, and remained Monsieur Fauchelevent. So long as it was for her, I could lie. But now it would be for myself, and I must not. It was sufficient for me to hold my peace, it is true, and all would go on. You ask me what has forced me to speak? A very odd thing, my conscience. To hold my peace was very easy, however. I passed the night in trying to persuade myself to do it. You questioned me, and what I have just said to you is so extraordinary that you have the right to do it. Well, yes, I have passed the night in alleging reasons to myself, and I gave myself very good reasons. I have done what I could. But there are two things in which I have not succeeded. In breaking the thread that holds me fixed, riveted and sealed here by the heart, or in silencing someone who speaks softly to me when I am alone. That is why I have come hither to tell you everything this morning. Everything, or nearly everything. It is useless to tell you that which concerns only myself. I keep that to myself. You know the essential points. So I have taken my mystery and have brought it to you, and I have disemboweled my secret before your eyes. It was not a resolution that was easy to make. I struggled all night long. Ah, you think that I did not tell myself that this was no Champmathieu affair? That by concealing my name I was doing no one any injury? That the name of Fauchelevent had been given to me by Fauchelevent himself, out of gratitude for a service rendered to him, and that I might assuredly keep it, and that I should be happy in that chamber which you offer me, that I should not be in anyone's way, that I should be in my own little corner, and that while you would have Cosette, I should have the idea that I was in the same house with her. Each one of us would have had this share of happiness. If I continued to be Monsieur Fauchelevent, that would arrange everything. Yes, with the exception of my soul. There was joy everywhere upon my surface, but the bottom of my soul remained black. It is not enough to be happy. One must be content. Thus I should have remained Monsieur Fauchelevent. Thus I should have concealed my true visage. Thus, in the presence of your expansion, I should have had an enigma. Thus, in the midst of your full noonday, I should have had shadows. Thus, without crying "Where?" I should have simply introduced the galleys to your fireside. I should have taken my seat at your table with the thought that if you knew who I was, you would drive me from it. I should have allowed myself to be served by domestics who, had they known, would have said, "How horrible!" I should have touched you with my elbow, which you have a right to dislike. I should have filched your clasps of the hand. There would have existed in your house a division of respect between venerable Whitelocks and tainted Whitelocks at your most intimate hours, when all hearts thought themselves open to the very bottom, to all the rest. When we four were together, your grandfather, you two, and myself, a stranger would have been present. I should have been side by side with you in your existence, having for my only care not to disarrange the cover of my dreadful pit. Thus I, a dead man, should have thrust myself upon you who are living beings. I should have condemned her to myself forever. You and Cosette, I would have had all three of our heads in the green cap. Does it not make you shudder? I am only the most crushed of men. I should have been the most monstrous of men, and I should have committed that crime every day, and I should have had that face of night upon my visage every day, and I should have communicated to you in my taint every day, to you, my dearly beloved, my children, to you, my innocent creatures. Is it nothing to hold one's peace? Is it a simple matter to keep silence? No, it is not simple. There is a silence which lies, and my lie, and my fraud, and my indignity, and my cowardice, and my treason, and my crime, I should have drained drop by drop. I should have spit it out, then swallowed it again. I should have finished it at midnight, and have begun again at midday, and my good morning would have lied, and my good night would have lied, and I should have slept on it. I should have eaten it with my bread, and I should have looked at Cosette in the face, and I should have responded to the smile of an angel by the smile of the damned soul, and I should have been an abominable villain. Why should I do it? In order to be happy. In order to be happy. Have I the right to be happy? I stand outside of life, sir. Jean Valjean paused. Marius listened. Such chains of ideas and of anguishes cannot be interrupted. Jean Valjean lowered his voice once more, but it was no longer a dull voice. It was a sinister voice. You ask why I speak. I am neither denounced, nor pursued, nor tracked, you say. Yes, I am denounced. Yes, I am tracked. By whom? By myself. It is I who bar the passage to myself, and I drag myself, and I push myself, and I arrest myself, and I execute myself, and when one holds oneself, one is firmly held. And seizing a handful of his own coat by the nape of the neck and extending toward Marius, Do you see that fist? He continued. Do you think that it holds that collar in such a wise as not to release it? Well, conscience is another grasp. If one desires to be happy, sir, one must never understand duty, for as soon as one has comprehended it, it is implacable. One would say that it punished you for comprehending it, but no, it rewards you, for it places you in a hell where you feel God beside you. One has no sooner lacerated his own entrails than he is at peace with himself. And with a poignant accent he added, Monsieur Pontmercy, this is not common sense. I am an honest man. It is by degrading myself in your eyes that I elevate myself in my own. This has happened to me once before. But it was less painful then. It was a mere nothing. Yes, an honest man. I should not be so if I, through my fault, you had continued to esteem me. Now that you despise me, I am so. I have that fatality hanging over me, that not being able to ever have anything but stolen consideration, that consideration humiliates me and crushes me inwardly, and in order that I may respect myself, it is necessary that I should be despised. Then I straighten up again. I am a galley slave who obeys his conscience. I know well that that is most improbable, but what would you have me to do about it? It is a fact. I have entered into engagements with myself. I keep them. There are encounters which bind us. There are chances which involve us in duties. You see, Monsieur Pontmercy, various things have happened to me in the course of my life. Again Jean Valjean paused, swallowing his saliva with an effort, as though his words had a bitter aftertaste. And then he went on. When one has such a horror hanging over one has not the right to make others share it without their knowledge. One has not the right to make them slip over one's own precipice without their perceiving it. One has not the right to let one's red blouse drag upon them. One has no right to slyly encumber with one's misery the happiness of others. It is hideous to approach those who are healthy and to touch them in the dark with one's ulcer. In spite of the fact that Fauchelevent lent me his name, I have no right to use it. He could give it to me, but I could not take it. A name is an I. You see, sir, that I have thought somewhat. I have read a little, although I am a peasant, and you see that I express myself properly. I understand things. I have procured myself an education. Well, yes, to abstract a name and to place oneself under it is dishonest. Letters of the alphabet can be filched like a purse or a watch. To be a false signature in flesh and blood? To be a living false key? To enter the house of honest people by picking their lock, never more to look straight forward or forever eye askance? To be infamous with the eye? No, 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 no! It is better to suffer, to bleed, to weep, to tear one's skin from the flesh with one's nails, to pass nights writhing in anguish, to devour oneself body and soul. That is why I have just told you all this, wantonly, as you say. He drew a painful breath and hurled his final word. In days gone by, I stole a loaf of bread in order to live. Today, in order to live, I will not steal a name. To live, interrupted Marius. You do not need that name in order to live. Ah, I understand the matter, said Jean Valjean, raising and lowering his head several times in succession. A silence ensued. Both held their peace, each plunged in a gulf of thoughts. Marius was sitting near a table and resting the corner of his mouth on one of his fingers, which was folded back. Jean Valjean was pacing to and fro. He paused before a mirror and remained motionless. Then, as though replying to some inward course of reasoning, he said, as he gazed at the mirror which he did not see, "While at present I am relieved." He took up his march again, and walked to the other end of the drawing-room. At the moment when he turned round, he perceived that Marius was watching his walk. Then he said with an inexpressible intonation, "I dragged my leg a little. Now you understand why." Then he turned fully round toward Marius. "And now, sir, imagine this. I have said nothing. I have remained Monsieur Fauchelevent. I have taken my place in your house. I am one of you. I am in my chamber. I come to breakfast in the morning in slippers. In the evening all three of us go to the play. I accompany Madame Pontmercy to the Tuileries and to the Place Royale. We are together. You think me your equal. One fine day you are there and I am there. We are conversing. We are laughing. All at once you hear a voice shouting this name, 'Jean Valjean!' And behold, that terrible hand, the police, darts from the darkness and abruptly tears off my mask." Again he paused. Marius had sprung to his feet with a shudder. Jean Valjean resumed, "What do you say to that?" Marius's silence answered for him. Jean Valjean continued, "You see that I am right in not holding my peace. Be happy. Be in heaven. Be the angel of an angel. Exist in the sun. Be content therewith, and do not trouble yourself about the means which a poor damned wretch takes to open his breast and force his duty to come forth. You have before you, sir, a wretched man." Marius slowly crossed the room, and when he was quite close to Jean Valjean, he offered the latter his hand. But Marius was obliged to step up and take that hand which was not offered. Jean Valjean let him have his own way, and it seemed to Marius that he pressed a hand of marble. "My grandfather has friends," said Marius. "I will procure your pardon." "It is useless," replied Jean Valjean. "I am believed to be dead, and that suffices. The dead are not subjected to surveillance. They are supposed to rot in peace. Death is the same thing as pardon." And disengaging the hand which Marius held, he added, with a sort of inexorable dignity, "Moreover, the friend to whom I have recourse is the doing of my duty, and I need but one pardon, that of my conscience." At that moment, a door at the other end of the drawing-room opened gently halfway, and in the opening Cosette's head appeared. They saw only her sweet face. Her hair was in charming disorder. Her eyelids were still swollen with sleep. She made the movement of a bird. which thrust its head out of its nest, glanced first at her husband, then at Jean Valjean, and cried to them with a smile, so that they seemed to behold a smile at the heart of a rose. "I will wager that you are talking politics. How stupid that is, instead of being with me." Jean Valjean shuddered. "Cosette," stammered Marius, and he paused. One would have said that they were two criminals. Cosette, who was radiant, continued to gaze at both of them. There was something in her eyes like gleams of paradise. "I have caught you in the very act," said Cosette. "Just now I heard my father, Fauchelevent, through the door saying, 'Conscience, doing my duty.' That is politics, indeed it is. I will not have it. People should not talk politics the very next day. It is not right." "You are mistaken, Cosette," said Marius. "We are talking business. We are discussing the best investment of your 600,000 francs. "That is not it at all," interrupted Cosette. "I am coming. Does anybody want me here?" And passing resolutely through the door, she entered the drawing-room. She was dressed in a voluminous white dressing gown, with 1,000 folds and large sleeves which, starting from the neck, fell to her feet. In the golden heavens of some ancient Gothic pictures, there are these charming sacks fit to clothe the angels. She contemplated herself from head to foot in a long mirror, and then exclaimed, in an outburst of ineffable ecstasy, "There was once a king and a queen. Oh, how happy I am!" That said, she made a curtsy to Marius and to Jean Valjean. "There," said she, "I am going to install myself near you in an easy-chair. We breakfast in half an hour, and you shall say anything you like. I know well that men must talk, and I will be very good." Marius took her by the arm and said lovingly to her, "We are talking business." "By the way," said Cosette, "I have opened my window. A flock of pierrots have arrived in the garden. Birds, not maskers. Today is Ash Wednesday, but not for the birds." "I tell you that we are talking business. Go, my little Cosette, leave us alone for a moment. We are talking figures. That will bore you." "You have a charming cravat on this morning, Marius. You are very dandified, monseigneur." "No, it will not bore me." "I assure you that it will bore you." "No, since it is you, I shall not understand you, but I shall listen to you. When one hears the voices of those whom one loves, one does not need to understand the words that they utter. That we should be here together, that is all that I desire. I shall remain with you. Bah! You are my beloved Cosette. Impossible." "Impossible, yes." "Very good," said Cosette. "I was going to tell you some news. I could have told you that your grandfather is still asleep, that your aunt is at mass, that the chimney in my father Fauchelevent's room smokes, that Nicolette has sent for the chimney sweep, that Toussaint and Nicolette have already quarreled, that Nicolette makes sport of Toussaint's stammer. Well, you shall know nothing. Ah, it is impossible. You shall see, gentlemen, that I in my turn can say, it is impossible. Then who will be caught? I beseech you, my little Marius, let me stay here with you too. I swear to you that it is indispensable that we should be alone." "Well, am I anybody?" Jean Valjean had not uttered a single word. Cosette turned to him. "In the first place, father, I want you to come and embrace me. What do you mean by not saying anything instead of taking my part? Who gave me such a father as that? You must perceive that my family life is very unhappy. My husband beats me. Come, embrace me instantly." Jean Valjean approached. Cosette turned toward Marius. "As for you, I shall make a face at you." Then she presented her brow to Jean Valjean. Jean Valjean advanced a step toward her. Cosette recoiled. "Father, you are pale. Does your arm hurt you?" "Did you sleep badly?" "No." "Are you sad?" "No." Embrace me if you are well, if you sleep well, if you are content, I will not scold you. And again she offered him her brow. Jean Valjean dropped a kiss upon that brow whereon rested a celestial gleam. Smile! Jean Valjean obeyed. It was the smile of a spectre. Now defend me against my husband. Cosette! Ejaculated Marius. Get angry, father. Say that I must stay. You can certainly talk before me. So, you think me very silly? What you say is astonishing. Business, placing money in a bank, a great matter, truly. Men make mysteries out of nothing. I am very pretty this morning. Look at me, Marius. And with an adorable shrug of the shoulders and an indescribably exquisite pout, she glanced at Marius. I love you, said Marius. I adore you, said Cosette, and they fell irresistibly into each other's arms. Now, said Cosette, adjusting a fold of her dressing gown with a triumphant little grimace, I shall stay. No, not that, said Marius in a supplicating tone. We have to finish something. Still no? Marius assumed a grave tone. I assure you, Cosette, that is impossible. Ah, you put on your man's voice, sir. That is well, I go. You, father, have not upheld me. Monsieur my father, monsieur my husband, you are tyrants. I shall go and tell grandpa. If you think that I'm going to return and talk platitudes to you, you are mistaken. I am proud. I shall wait for you now. You shall see that it is you who are going to be bored without me. I am going. It is well. And she left the room. 2 seconds later the door opened once more. Her fresh and rosy head was again thrust between the 2 leaves, and she cried to them, I am very angry indeed. The door closed again, and the shadows descended once more. It was as though a ray of sunlight should have suddenly traversed the night without itself being conscious of it. Marius made sure that the door was securely closed. Poor Cosette, he murmured, when she finds out. At that word, Jean Valjean trembled in every limb. He fixed on Marius a bewildered eye. Cosette! Oh, yes, it is true you are going to tell Cosette about this. That is right. Stay, I had not thought of that. One has the strength for one thing, but not the other. Sir, I conjure you, I entreat you now, sir, give me your most sacred word of honor that you will not tell her. Is it not enough that you should know it? I have been able to say it myself, without being forced to it. I could have told it to the universe, to the whole world. It was all one to me, but she does not know what it is. It would terrify her. What, a convict? We should be obliged to explain matters to her, to say to her, he is a man who has been in the galleys. She saw the chain gang pass by me one day. Oh, my God! He dropped into an armchair and hid his face in his hands. His grief was not audible, but from the quivering of his shoulders, it was evident that he was weeping. Silent tears, terrible tears. There is something of suffocation in the sob. He was seized with a sort of convulsion. He threw himself against the back of the chair as though to gain breath, letting his arms fall, and allowing Marius to see his face inundated with tears. And Marius heard him murmur so low that his voice seemed to issue from fathomless depths. Oh, would that I could die! Be at your ease, said Marius. I will keep your secret for myself alone. And, less touched perhaps than he ought to have been, but forced, for the last hour, to familiarize himself with something as unexpected as it was dreadful, gradually beholding the convict superimposed before his very eyes upon Mr. Fauchelevent, overcome, little by little, by that lugubrious reality, and led by the natural inclination of the situation to recognize the space which had just been placed between that man and himself, Marius added, It is impossible that I should not speak a word to you with regard to the deposit which you have so faithfully and honestly remitted. That is an act of probity. It is just that some recompense should be bestowed on you. Fix the sum yourself. It shall be counted out to you. Do not fear to set it very high. Thank you, sir, replied Jean Valjean gently. He remained in thought for a moment, mechanically passing the tip of his forefinger across his thumbnail. Then he lifted up his voice. All is nearly over, but one last thing remains for me. What is it? Jean Valjean struggled with what seemed a last hesitation, and without a voice, without breath, he stammered rather than said, Now that you know, do you think, sir, you who are the master, that I ought not to see Cosette any more? I think that would be better, replied Marius coldly. I shall never see her more, murmured Jean Valjean, and he directed his steps toward the door. He laid his hand on the knob. The latch yielded. The door opened. Jean Valjean pushed it open far enough to pass through, stood motionless for a second, then closed the door again and turned to Marius. He was no longer pale, he was livid. There were no longer any tears in his eyes, but only a sort of tragic flame. His voice had regained a strange composure. Stay, sir, he said. If you will allow it, I will come to see her. I assure you that I desire it greatly. If I had not cared to see Cosette, I should not have made to you the confession that I have made. I should have gone away. But as I desired to remain in the place where Cosette is, and to continue to see her, I had to tell you about it honestly. You follow my reasoning, do you not? It is a matter easily understood. You see, I have had her with me for more than 9 years. We lived first in that hut on the boulevard, then in the convent, then near the Luxembourg. That was where you saw her for the first time. You remember her blue plush hat? Then we went to the Quartier des Invalides, where there was a railing on the garden, the Rue Plumet. I lived in a little back courtyard, whence I could hear her piano. That was my life. We never left each other. That lasted for 9 years and some months. I was like her own father, and she was my child. I do not know whether you understand, Monsieur Pontmercy, but to go away now, never to see her again, never to speak to her again, to no longer have anything, would be hard. If you do not disapprove of it, I will come to see Cosette from time to time. I will not come often. I will not remain long. You shall give orders that I am to be received in the little waiting room on the ground floor. I could enter perfectly well by the back door, but that might create surprise perhaps, and it would be better, I think, for me to enter by the usual door. Truly, sir, I should like to see a little more of Cosette, as rarely as you please. Put yourself in my place. I have nothing left but that. And then we must be cautious. If I no longer come at all, it would produce a bad effect. It would be considered singular. What I can do, by the way, is to come in the afternoon when night is beginning to fall. You shall come every evening, said Marius, and Cosette will be waiting for you. You are kind, sir, said Jean Valjean. Marius saluted Jean Valjean. Happiness escorted despair to the door, and these two men parted. End of Book 7, Chapter 1.